Single black mom helps starving old woman, unaware she's CEO's mom. This made the CEO fall for her. Leona Brooks pressed her back against the cold brick wall of her former apartment building, watching the last of her belongings get carried out by two men who avoided eye contact. The rain had started as a gentle mist an hour ago, but now it drummed steadily on the cardboard boxes containing her entire life. Her 8-year-old son Marcus sat beside her on their old couch, clutching his worn teddy bear and trying not to cry. "Mama, where are we gonna sleep tonight?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. Leona pulled him closer, her heart breaking at the question she couldn't answer. 3 months of Marcus's medical bills had drained every penny she'd saved. The seizures had come out of nowhere, turning their stable life upside down. Doctor visits, tests, medications, it all added up faster than her cleaning jobs could cover. "We'll figure it out, baby. We always do," she said, kissing the top of his head. But her voice shook despite her efforts to sound confident. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, emerged from the building shaking water off his umbrella. He glanced at them briefly, his expression somewhere between guilt and irritation. "I'm sorry, Leona. You know I held off as long as I could. 3 months is—" "I know," Leona cut him off quietly. There was no point in begging anymore. She'd used up all her pleas, all her promises to catch up on rent. "Thank you for the extra time you gave us." He nodded awkwardly and walked away, leaving them alone with their soggy boxes and uncertain future. As the afternoon wore on, the rain grew heavier. Leona had managed to cover most of their belongings with a tarp she'd found, but everything felt damp and hopeless. She counted the crumpled bills in her purse for the 10th time, $43 and some change. Enough for maybe 2 nights at the cheapest motel, if she could find one that would take them. She was reaching for her phone to call the homeless shelter when movement caught her eye. Across the street, near the alley behind the corner grocery store, someone was hunched over the large dumpster. At first, Leona thought it might be a raccoon or stray dog, but as she looked closer, she realized it was a person, an elderly woman with silver hair matted by rain, wearing a torn coat that might have once been expensive. The woman's thin arms reached deep into the dumpster, pulling out what looked like half-eaten fruit and moldy bread. She examined each piece carefully before either discarding it or stuffing it into a plastic bag. "Mama, look!" Marcus pointed. "That lady's eating garbage." Leona's chest tightened. She knew hunger intimately, the gnawing emptiness that made you consider things you never thought you would. But seeing someone else, someone who looked like she could be somebody's grandmother, digging through trash for food stirred something fierce in her heart. Without thinking, Leona stood up and walked to the small cooler where she'd packed their lunch for the day. Inside were 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, the last food they had until she could figure out their next move. She'd been saving them for later, when Marcus got hungry. "What you doing, Mama?" Marcus asked as she pulled both sandwiches out. "Something I should have done an hour ago," she said, wrapping the sandwiches in the clean paper towels she'd been saving. Leona crossed the wet street, her sneakers splashing through puddles. The elderly woman looked up as she approached, her eyes wide with fear, like a deer caught in headlights. Up close, Leona could see she was probably in her 70s, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that held intelligence despite her current circumstances. "Ma'am," Leona said gently, stopping a few feet away so she wouldn't seem threatening. "I have these sandwiches. They're fresh. Would you like them?" The woman straightened slowly, her gaze moving from Leona's face to the wrapped sandwiches and back again. She didn't speak, but Leona could see the fight out in her expression, pride battling desperate need. "Please," Leona added. "I know what it's like to be hungry. Nobody should have to." The woman's composure cracked slightly. She reached out with shaking hands and accepted the sandwiches. Her fingers, though dirty, felt soft and delicate, hands that weren't used to this kind of desperation. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cultured and refined, completely at odds with her appearance. "You don't know what this means." Leona smiled. "We all need help sometimes." The woman unwrapped the first sandwich with the reverence of someone opening a precious gift. She took small, careful bites, closing her eyes as if savoring every crumb. Tears mixed with rainwater on her cheeks. "You have children?" the woman asked between bites, nodding toward Marcus, who watched from across the street. "One son. He's 8. The woman looked at the sandwiches, then back at Leona. "These were for him, weren't they? For both of you?" Leona didn't answer, but her expression said everything. "Why?" the woman asked. "Why give away your food to a stranger?" Leona thought about it for a moment. "Because today I lost my home, but I still have my son. You look like you've lost a lot more than that." The woman finished both sandwiches in silence, then carefully folded the paper towels and put them in her coat pocket. She stood up slowly, studying Leona's face as if trying to memorize it. "What's your name, child?" "Leona. Leona Brooks." The woman nodded once, firmly. "Leona Brooks. I won't forget." Before Leona could ask her name in return, the woman turned and walked down the alley, disappearing around the corner like she had never been there at all. Leona stood in the rain for another moment, wondering who she was and what had brought her to digging through garbage on a Tuesday afternoon. When she returned to Marcus, he looked up at her with confusion. "Mama, now what are we gonna eat?" Leona sat down beside him and pulled him close. "Don't worry, baby. Something will work out. It always does." But as she said it, staring at their boxes getting soaked in the rain, she wondered if this time might be different. She wondered if maybe they'd finally run out of miracles. What she didn't know was that the strange, hungry woman had just set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. In her expensive coat pocket, beneath the folded paper towels, Eleanor Caldwell carried a business card that could have solved all of Leona's problems in an instant. But sometimes the most powerful people in the world need to remember what kindness looks like before they remember how to give it. The rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of their old life and preparing the ground for something entirely new. 2 weeks after the eviction, Leona stood in the cramped bathroom of the Mercy Hope shelter, trying to make herself look professional with nothing but a cracked mirror and borrowed makeup. The night shift cleaning position at Caldwell Enterprises had been a miracle, the only company willing to hire someone with a shelter address. The pay was just enough to start saving for a deposit on a new apartment, if she was careful with every penny. "You got this, Mama," Marcus whispered from their narrow cot as she gathered her cleaning supplies. He'd grown quieter since they'd moved to the shelter, more watchful. Too much responsibility for an 8-year-old's shoulders. "I'll be back before you wake up," she promised, kissing his forehead. "Mrs. Rodriguez will check on you." The bus ride to downtown took 45 minutes, plenty of time for Leona to study the employee handbook and wonder what kind of people worked in a building that reached into the clouds. Caldwell Enterprises owned half the city's skyline, everyone knew that. Their logo was on construction sites, shopping centers, and charity events throughout the region. The night supervisor, Janet, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd worked cleaning contracts for 20 years. "You'll be on floors 30 through 35, she explained as they rode the service elevator. "Executive level, so everything needs to be perfect. These people notice dust on their door frames." Leona nodded, grateful for any work that could get them back on their feet. The executive floor was like stepping into another world, marble floors, paintings that probably cost more than she'd made in years, and windows offering a view of the entire city spread out like scattered diamonds. She worked methodically, room by room, office by office. Most were empty, but occasionally she'd pass someone working late, usually too focused on their computer screens to notice her. She preferred it that way. Invisible was safe. It was in the largest corner office that she found the family photo, a silver-framed picture of a distinguished man in his 40s standing next to an elegant older woman with sharp cheekbones and intelligent eyes. Something about the woman's face nagged at her, familiar in a way she couldn't place. "That's our CEO and his mother," Janet said, appearing in the doorway. "Julian Caldwell and Eleanor. She used to come around more often, but lately." Janet shrugged. "Rich people problems, I guess." Leona studied the photograph more carefully. The woman looked refined, well cared for, the kind of person who never wanted for anything. Nothing like the desperate woman digging through garbage 2 weeks ago. Still, something about those eyes. She seems nice, Leona said, carefully dusting around the frame. Mrs. Caldwell? She's different from most of them. Always says thank you to the cleaning staff, remembers our names. But she's been acting strange lately, disappearing for hours, asking odd questions about employees. Janet lowered her voice. Security's been keeping closer tabs on her. Her son's worried. 3 floors above, in the penthouse apartment atop the Caldwell building, Eleanor Caldwell sat in her study surrounded by papers that had nothing to do with business. For the past 2 weeks, she'd been conducting her own investigation, using resources that would have impressed professional detectives. The private investigator had been thorough. Leona Brooks, 20 years old, single mother, no criminal record, excellent work history until her son's medical crisis. Evicted for non-payment of rent despite working 3 jobs. Currently residing at Mercy Hope Shelter with her son Marcus, age 8, who suffered from a seizure disorder requiring expensive medication. But the reports, detailed as they were, couldn't capture what Eleanor had seen that rainy afternoon, the way Leona had given away her last food without hesitation, the gentle way she'd spoken, the dignity she'd maintained even while losing everything. Eleanor touched the business card in her desk drawer, the one she could have handed over that day to solve all of Leona's problems instantly. She'd been carrying it out of habit, returning from a board meeting when her driver had gotten lost in an unfamiliar neighborhood. Her anxiety attack had hit suddenly, leaving her disoriented and alone when she'd stumbled from the car. She'd been wandering for hours when hunger and panic had driven her to that dumpster, the lowest point in her 73 years of life. And then an angel had appeared, an angel with kind eyes who'd given her sandwiches and dignity when she had neither. The knock on her study door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Julian entered, his expression concerned. "Mother, Dr. Hendricks called. You missed your appointment again." Eleanor closed the file and looked at her son. Brilliant, successful, but sometimes blind to things that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. "I've been busy." "Busy with what?" "The security team says you've been asking about employees, requesting access to personnel files. What's going on?" She'd raised him to be direct, so she couldn't fault him for it now. "I met someone remarkable. And I want to do something about it." Julian sat down across from her desk, his CEO mask slipping to reveal the worried son underneath. "Mother, if this is about charity work, we have an entire foundation." "This isn't about charity," Eleanor interrupted. "This is about character. About finding someone who embodies everything we claim to value but rarely recognize when it's right in front of us." "Who is this person?" Eleanor smiled, thinking of Leona working 30 floors below them at that very moment, invisible to everyone who passed her in the halls. "Someone who gave me hope when I'd forgotten what it looked like." Meanwhile, Leona finished cleaning the last office on her assigned floors, her back aching and her hands raw from industrial cleaning solutions. She rode the service elevator down to the parking garage, planning her route home on the late-night bus. She had no idea that her act of kindness had set wheels in motion that would reshape her entire world. She didn't know that the woman she'd helped was sleeping 30 floors above her former apartment, or that mother and son were both thinking about her as they planned moves that would change everything. All she knew was that tomorrow she'd return to clean these same offices, save every dollar she could, and keep building toward a better future for Marcus. One day at a time, one floor at a time, invisible but determined. The city sparkled below as she waited for the bus, full of possibilities she couldn't yet imagine. Julian Caldwell had built his empire by reading people, but his mother had become a puzzle he couldn't solve. For 3 weeks now, Eleanor had been slipping out of the building at odd hours, returning with dirt under her fingernails and secrets in her eyes. The security reports painted a picture that made no sense: visits to homeless shelters, conversations with social workers, hours spent in her study with files that had nothing to do with Caldwell business. "Sir, there's been another incident," Marcus Webb, head of security, said as he entered Julian's office. "Your mother was found in the employee break room at 2 in the morning, talking to the night cleaning staff." Julian looked up from his contracts, irritation mixing with worry. What was she doing there? According to the janitor, she was asking about someone named Leona. Wanted to know about her work ethic, her character. The cleaning lady seemed confused but said this Leona person was reliable and kind to everyone. The name meant nothing to Julian, but something about his mother's behavior suggested it should. Pull the employment files for all Leonas in the building. Already did, sir. Only one match, Leona Brooks, night shift cleaning, hired 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. Exactly when his mother's strange behavior had started. Julian took the thin file, scanning the basic information. Single mother, shelter address, clean background check. Nothing that would typically interest Eleanor Caldwell. I want to know everything about her, Julian said, but discreetly. And I want to understand what connection she has to my mother. The investigation took less than 48 hours. Julian sat in his office at midnight, reading the detailed report that painted a picture of resilience and heartbreak. Medical bills that had destroyed a stable life. Eviction despite working multiple jobs. A mother doing everything she could to care for a sick child. But it was the final page that made everything click. Security footage from a street camera 3 blocks away, dated the same day his mother had disappeared for 6 hours. The image was grainy but clear enough. Eleanor Caldwell, disheveled and desperate, accepting food from a black woman outside an apartment building. His mother, one of the wealthiest women in the city, being fed by someone who just lost her home. Julian stared at the photograph until his eyes watered. He'd never seen his mother look so vulnerable, so human. And he'd never seen anyone show such kindness to a stranger. The next morning, Julian made an unusual decision. Instead of reviewing quarterly reports in his office, he took the service elevator to the 34th floor at 6 a.m., just as the night cleaning shift was ending. He found Leona in the conference room, carefully arranging chairs around the massive table. She moved with quiet efficiency, taking pride in work that most people would consider beneath notice. When she looked up and saw him, she straightened quickly. I'm sorry, sir. I'll be done in just a minute. Take your time, Julian said, studying her face. Up close, he could see the exhaustion around her eyes, but also the strength. This was the woman who'd fed his mother without expecting anything in return. You're Leona, right? She looked surprised that he knew her name. Yes, sir. Is there a problem with my work? No problem at all. I've heard good things about you. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm Julian Caldwell. I own the building. Her eyes widened, and she took a small step back. Mr. Caldwell. I didn't know. I hope I haven't. You haven't done anything wrong, he assured her quickly. I just wanted to meet you personally. It's not often I hear such consistent praise about an employee. A flush of pride crossed her features. I just tried to do good work, sir. This job means everything to me and my son. Julian found himself genuinely curious about her story. Over the next 10 minutes, he learned about Marcus's condition, about the struggle to find affordable medication, about nights spent in the shelter planning for a better future. She spoke without self-pity, focusing on solutions rather than problems. Your son is lucky to have you, Julian said finally. I'm the lucky one, Leona replied. He keeps me going when everything else feels impossible. As she gathered her cleaning supplies to leave, Julian made another impulsive decision. Leona, would you be interested in some additional work? Sometimes I need help organizing files, simple administrative tasks. It would be during the day, better pay. Her face lit up with hope so bright it was almost painful to see. I would be very interested, Mr. Caldwell. Thank you for considering me. After she left, Julian stood in the empty conference room thinking about the woman who'd shown his mother kindness when she needed it most. He thought about Eleanor's secretive behavior, her questions about character and dignity. His mother had found something rare in Leona Brooks, authenticity in a world full of pretense. But Julian was beginning to realize he'd found something too. In their brief conversation, Leona had impressed him more than executives with decades of experience. There was something about her quiet strength, her unwavering focus on what mattered most, that reminded him why he'd gone into business in the first place, to build something meaningful. That afternoon, Eleanor knocked on his office door with a request that no longer seemed strange. "I want to invite someone to dinner," she said. "Someone special." Julian looked up from his desk, where Leona's employee file still lay open. "Would this someone happen to work in our building?" Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "You know. I know enough. The question is, what do you plan to do about it?" His mother smiled, and for the first time in weeks, she looked like herself again. "I plan to say thank you properly. And I think you should meet her too. Really meet her." Julian thought about his conversation with Leona that morning, about the way she talked about her son with such fierce love. "I think I'd like that very much." Neither of them mentioned that Julian had already begun falling for the woman who'd saved his mother's dignity with 2 simple sandwiches. Some realizations were too new, too unexpected to put into words just yet. Julian had orchestrated corporate mergers worth billions, but planning a simple lunch meeting felt impossibly complicated. For 2 weeks, he'd been finding excuses to be in the building during Leona's day shifts, watching how she interacted with everyone from security guards to senior executives. What he saw consistently amazed him. Today's test would be different. He'd arranged for his assistant to, accidentally, book the executive dining room for a staff appreciation lunch, inviting employees from all departments. Julian planned to attend as a visiting regional manager, a role that would let him observe Leona in a social setting without the pressure of his real identity. The dining room buzzed with conversation as employees enjoyed a rare break from their usual routines. Julian spotted Leona immediately, sitting at a corner table with 2 older women from accounting and a young man from maintenance. She wore a simple blue dress she'd clearly borrowed from someone. It was slightly too big but clean and pressed with care. "That's her, isn't it?" Eleanor whispered, appearing beside him with the stealth that had made her legendary in boardrooms. She'd insisted on observing from the kitchen doorway, curious to see this woman who'd occupied her thoughts for a month. "Yes," Julian murmured. "And watch what happens next." An elderly janitor named Robert approached Leona's table, carrying his lunch tray with shaking hands. Parkinson's had made his job increasingly difficult, and Julian knew most departments had been complaining about his performance. Robert's hands trembled as he tried to sit down, nearly dropping his soup. Without hesitation, Leona stood up and gently took his tray, setting it safely on the table. "Here you go, Mr. Robert. How's your granddaughter doing? The one starting college?" The old man's face lit up. "She got into nursing school, thanks to you asking about her. Nobody else remembers things like that." "Of course I remember," Leona said, helping him into his chair. "That's wonderful news. She's going to make an excellent nurse." Julian felt something shift in his chest. He'd been planning to let Robert go at the end of the month, a decision that had seemed purely business until this moment. "Now I understand," Eleanor whispered. "She sees people, really sees them." The test Julian had planned took an unexpected turn when Derek Hamilton, a junior executive known for his arrogance, made his appearance. Derek had been passed over for promotion twice and carried a chip on his shoulder that made him particularly unpleasant to staff he considered beneath him. Well, Derek said loudly, approaching Leona's table. "Looks like management is really scraping the bottom of the barrel for lunch guests these days." The conversation around nearby tables quieted. Leona looked up calmly, her expression unchanged. "Hello, Mr. Hamilton. How are you today?" "Better than some people, apparently," Derek sneered, looking pointedly at her borrowed dress. "Though I suppose when you're living in a shelter, even cafeteria food feels like fine dining." Julian's hands clenched into fists. He started to move forward, but Eleanor caught his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Let's see how she handles this." Leona stood up slowly, her dignity intact despite Derek's cruelty. "You're right that I'm grateful for this meal," she said quietly. "I'm grateful for a lot of things, my son's health, steady work, kind people who make each day a little brighter." She looked directly at Derek. I hope you find things to be grateful for too, Mr. Hamilton. It makes life much more pleasant. The sincerity in her voice made Derek's sneer falter. Around them, other employees watched with a mixture of admiration and second-hand embarrassment for Derek's behavior. That's enough, Julian said, stepping forward. He'd abandoned his plan to remain anonymous. Mr. Hamilton, I think you have work to attend to. Derek's face went pale as he recognized Julian's voice, even without seeing his face clearly. Sir, You were just leaving, Julian said firmly. Derek practically ran from the room. Julian turned to the table, where Leona was looking at him with curiosity and concern. I apologize for that disruption. Are you all right? I'm fine, thank you, Mr. Caldwell, he said, dropping his pretense. Julian Caldwell. The recognition dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by panic. Oh my God! Mr. Caldwell, I had no idea. I'm so sorry you had to witness that scene. You're sorry? Julian couldn't help but smile. You handled that with more grace than most executives handle board meetings. I'm the one who should apologize, for Derek's behavior and for not introducing myself properly earlier. Leona looked confused. Earlier? We spoke in the conference room a few weeks ago. You were finishing up cleaning. I offered you some additional work. That was you? Her voice was barely a whisper. You're the CEO who offered me day shifts? Guilty as charged. Julian found himself charmed by her genuine shock. And I have to say, watching you just now reinforced every good thing I've heard about your character. The other employees at the table were staring openly now, clearly trying to process their CEO having a friendly conversation with someone from the night cleaning crew. Mr. Caldwell, Leona said carefully, I hope Mr. Hamilton won't face any consequences because of me. People say things when they're frustrated and... You're defending him? Julian was incredulous. After what he just said to you? Everyone deserves compassion, Leona said simply. Maybe he's having a bad day, or going through something difficult. I don't want to be the reason someone loses their job. Julian stared at her, feeling something profound shift in his understanding of what real strength looked like. This woman, who had every reason to want revenge on someone who'd publicly humiliated her, was instead showing concern for his welfare. From across the room, Eleanor watched her son's face transform as he looked at Leona. She'd seen Julian impressed by intelligence, attracted to beauty, charmed by wit. But she'd never seen him look at someone with such pure admiration, such genuine respect. Would you have dinner with me? Julian heard himself ask before he could think better of it. To continue this conversation somewhere more private? Leona's eyes widened. Mr. Caldwell, I don't think that would be appropriate. You're my employer and I'm just... You're extraordinary, he said quietly. And I'd very much like the chance to get to know the person who shows such kindness to everyone around her. As Leona considered his invitation, Eleanor smiled from her hiding place in the kitchen doorway. Her son had finally met someone who challenged him not with ambition or intellect, but with something far more rare, a genuinely good heart. The test had revealed more than Julian had planned. He'd meant to evaluate Leona's character, but instead discovered something he hadn't been looking for. The possibility of love based on respect rather than convenience. 3 days after the lunch incident, Leona received a phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was refined, elderly, and somehow familiar. Miss Brooks? This is Eleanor Caldwell. I have a proposition for you. Leona nearly dropped her phone. She was sitting in the shelter's common room, helping Marcus with his homework while other families crowded around the single television. Mrs. Caldwell? Julian's mother? Yes, dear. I have a private matter that requires discretion, and I believe you're exactly the right person for the job. Would you be available Saturday morning for a special cleaning assignment? The pay would be substantial, $500 for a few hours' work. $500. That was more than Leona made in 2 weeks. It would be enough for the apartment deposit she'd been saving toward, maybe even enough to catch up on Marcus's medical bills. Of course, Mrs. Caldwell. Where would you like me to meet you? Eleanor provided an address in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, a mansion that Leona had only seen in magazine spreads about architectural wonders. She hung up the phone feeling both grateful and nervous. Why would Eleanor Caldwell personally hire her for a cleaning job? Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, reminiscent of that day a month ago when everything had changed. Leona took 2 buses to reach the Caldwell estate, arriving at the imposing iron gates exactly on time. The mansion beyond looked like something from a fairy tale, all stone columns and perfectly manicured gardens. A housekeeper led her to an elegant sitting room where Eleanor waited, dressed in a simple but expensive cream-colored suit. Up close, Leona could see the intelligence in those sharp blue eyes, but also something else: nervousness? Anticipation? Thank you for coming, Leona. Please sit down. Mrs. Caldwell, I'd brought all my supplies. Where would you like me to start? Eleanor smiled gently. Actually, dear, I didn't bring you here to clean. I brought you here to talk. Confusion flickered across Leona's face. I don't understand. A month ago, I was having the worst day of my life. Eleanor began slowly. I'd gotten lost, had a panic attack, and found myself alone and desperate in an unfamiliar neighborhood. I was so disoriented that She paused, her composed mask slipping slightly. I was digging through garbage, looking for something to eat. Leona's eyes widened as recognition dawned. The silver hair, the refined voice, those intelligent eyes. Suddenly she was back on that rainy street, watching a desperate woman search through a dumpster. Oh my God! Leona whispered. That was you. Yes. Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. And you, without knowing who I was or what I could do for you, gave me your last food. 2 sandwiches that were meant for you and your son. Leona shook her head, overwhelmed. Mrs. Caldwell, I had no idea. If I had known. If you had known, would you have acted differently? The question hung in the air between them. Leona thought about it honestly. No, she said finally. You were hungry. I had food. It didn't matter who you were. Exactly. Eleanor leaned forward. Do you know how rare that is? In my 73 years, I've met leaders and princes, billionaires and celebrities. But I've never met anyone who showed such pure kindness to a stranger. Tears were building in Leona's eyes. You don't understand, Mrs. Caldwell. That day, I had nothing left to give. We'd just been evicted, Marcus was scared, and those sandwiches were all the food we had. But you looked so lost, so hungry. And you gave them to me anyway. Eleanor reached across the space between them and took Leona's hands. You saved me that day, in more ways than you know. Not just from hunger, but from despair. You reminded me that goodness still exists in this world. Before Leona could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Julian appeared in the doorway, and his presence filled the room with a different kind of energy. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said, but his eyes were only on Leona. Eleanor smiled. Perfect timing. Leona and I were just getting reacquainted. Julian walked into the room, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something more vulnerable. Leona, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you weeks ago. Julian, Eleanor warned gently. No, Mother. She deserves the truth. He turned back to Leona, who was watching him with growing alarm. I've been watching you. Following you, in a way. Ever since I found out what you did for my mother. Leona stood up quickly, her face flushing with anger and embarrassment. You've been spying on me? Not spying, Julian said desperately. Trying to understand. My mother came home that day changed, talking about an angel who'd shown her kindness. When I found out it was you, I had to know more. I had to see if you were real. So you tested me, Leona said, the pieces falling into place. The lunch, the conversations, the job offer, it was all some kind of experiment. At first, yes, Julian admitted, his honesty painful to witness. But then I got to know you. Really know you. And somewhere along the way, I stopped testing and started falling. Falling? Leona's voice was barely a whisper. In love, Julian said simply. With your kindness, your strength, your incredible heart. With the woman who defends people who hurt her, who remembers everyone's name, who gives away her last meal to a stranger. Leona looked between mother and son, feeling manipulated and confused. So what is this? Some kind of charity case? The rich family helps the poor woman who was nice to them. No, Eleanor said firmly, standing to face her. This is about recognizing something precious when we see it. This is about two people who've spent their lives surrounded by others who want something from them, finally meeting someone who expects nothing. I don't understand any of this, Leona said, moving toward the door. I should go. Please don't, Julian said, stepping closer. Let me prove to you that this isn't about charity or manipulation. Let me show you that what I feel is real. Leona paused at the doorway, looking back at them both. Eleanor's eyes held hope and affection, while Julian's held something deeper, vulnerability, longing, and what looked like genuine love. I need time to think, she said finally. This is all too much. As she left the mansion, Leona's mind raced with questions and possibilities. Behind her, mother and son watched from the window, both hoping they hadn't lost their chance with the remarkable woman who'd changed their lives with 2 simple sandwiches. 2 weeks passed in agonizing silence. Julian threw himself into work, making decisions with mechanical precision, while his heart remained focused on a woman who wouldn't take his calls. Eleanor spent her days staring out at the city, wondering if her revelation had destroyed rather than healed. At the shelter, Leona moved through her routine like someone sleepwalking. Marcus noticed first, the way children always do when their world shifts. Mama, why are you sad? He asked one evening as they sat on their narrow cot, his homework spread between them. I'm not sad, baby. Just thinking. About the rich lady and her son? Leona looked at him in surprise. She tried to keep the Caldwell situation from affecting their time together, but 8-year-olds were remarkably perceptive. How do you know about that? Marcus shrugged. You talk in your sleep sometimes. You keep saying Julian's name. Heat flooded Leona's cheeks. Even unconsciously, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he'd looked at her in that mansion, vulnerable and hopeful and completely unlike the polished CEO she'd expected. Mama, Marcus said carefully. If someone did something wrong but they were sorry, would you forgive them? That depends on why they did it, and whether they really meant their apology. But if they really, really meant it? And if they were trying to help? Leona studied her son's serious face. Yes, I suppose I would. Why? Because you taught me that good people sometimes make mistakes, but that doesn't make them bad people. 3 days later, Leona made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She called Julian's office and asked to meet him, not at his mansion or his corporate building, but at the small park where she and Marcus sometimes went when they needed space to think. Julian arrived early, pacing nervously near the playground where Marcus was conquering the monkey bars with determined concentration. When Leona approached, he stopped mid-step, his expression cautious but hopeful. Thank you for agreeing to see me, he said. I've been thinking about what you said, Leona replied, settling onto a park bench. About falling in love. Julian sat beside her, careful to maintain distance. And? I think you're telling the truth. I think you really do care about me. She turned to face him. But I also think you don't really know me. You know the version of me that was kind to your mother, that works hard, that tries to be good. But you don't know what I'm like when I'm angry, or scared, or when Marcus is having a bad day and I feel like I'm failing as a mother. Then let me learn, Julian said quietly. Let me know all of you, not just the parts you show the world. It won't be easy. I come with complications, a sick child, financial struggles, a life that's nothing like yours. I don't want a life like mine, Julian said with sudden intensity. I want a life with meaning, with real connections. I want what my mother found that day when you showed her kindness. Marcus ran over, slightly out of breath but grinning. Mama, I made it across all the monkey bars. Did you see? I saw, baby. That was amazing. Marcus turned his attention to Julian, studying him with the frank curiosity of childhood. Are you the man who made Mama cry? Marcus! Leona protested, but Julian held up a hand. It's okay. He crouched down to Marcus's eye level. Yes, I think I am. I hurt your mama's feelings, and I'm very sorry about that. Are you going to hurt her again? I'm going to try very hard not to, Julian said seriously. Your mama is the most remarkable person I've ever met, and I'd like to be her friend, if she'll let me. Marcus considered this, then nodded. Okay. But if you make her cry again, I'll be really mad. That's fair, Julian agreed solemnly. Over the following months, their relationship developed slowly, carefully. Julian kept his word about getting to know the real Leona, staying up with her when Marcus had seizures, celebrating small victories like finding a new apartment in a safe neighborhood, learning that she sang off-key in the shower and cried during commercials about dogs. Eleanor became a constant presence too, not as the wealthy benefactor Leona had feared, but as a genuine friend who remembered what it felt like to be vulnerable and alone. She taught Marcus chess and listened to his dreams of becoming a doctor, while Marcus showed her how to make paper airplanes and shared his philosophy that ice cream made everything better. The job offer came 6 months later, not from Julian, but from the head of human resources, who'd heard about Leona's organizational skills and attention to detail. The position in community outreach came with a salary that would support her and Marcus comfortably, health insurance that covered Marcus's medications, and work that felt meaningful. You didn't arrange this, Leona said to Julian that evening as they walked through the city park where they'd had their first real conversation. I suggested they consider you, he admitted. But the decision was theirs. Your qualifications got you the job. And us? She asked, stopping beneath a streetlight that cast golden circles on the pavement. What happens with us? Julian took her hands gently. That's up to you. I love you, Leona. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you make me want to be better than I am. But I won't pressure you into anything. Leona looked at this man who'd started as her employer and become something much more complex and precious. He'd seen her at her lowest point and chosen to stay. He'd learned to love not just her virtues but her flaws, her fears, her ordinary human messiness. I love you too, she said simply, and watched his face transform with joy. A year later, Marcus walked his mother down the aisle of a small church filled with friends from the shelter, co-workers from Caldwell Enterprises, and a grandmother who'd learned that the best gifts sometimes came disguised as strangers offering sandwiches in the rain. From eviction to employment to love, Leona's life had been rewritten not through charity, but through the recognition that character matters more than circumstances, and that sometimes the most powerful people in the world are the ones who remember how to be human.